Welcome to the Caged In podcast and this special bonus episode of a series I'm running called Caged In Interviews, where I just talk to weird and wonderful people who in some way have had some connection to Cage. And this week it is the amazing Mike Pearl. Mike has written a book called The Day It Finally Happens. I'm not going to talk about it too much in the intro throughout this episode and really dive deep into some of the subjects of some of the chapters. But I implore that if you're interested in Mike's book, and I really do recommend it. I've been listening to it on audiobook. You can buy it from Amazon or wherever you get books from. It is a really interesting and fascinating look at just possibilities of what could happen if certain things were to happen in the world. I know that's a very lackluster explanation, but Mike does a much better job of it in the podcast. So yeah, just sit back and enjoy this one, and there'll be plenty more interviews to come in the future. Today I'm joined by Mike Pearl, author of The Day It Finally Happens, Alien Contact, Dinosaur Parks, Immortal Humans, and Other Possible Phenomena. How are you, Mike?
Pretty as good as could possibly be expected under the conditions we're all under.
Well, yeah, your book kind of prophesized this in a weird way. How does that make you feel?
If I had listened to a lot of the people that I talked to for the book, then I would have had a lot more food stored up in my shed. I would have had way more ammunition. It's like I feel like I didn't listen to my own advice, basically.
Well, yeah, it's quite interesting. The writer of Contagion has recently been interviewed and asked about like the film mirrors what's going on right now, and he's like, "Yeah, I'm not surprised. Like everyone I spoke to said, this is exactly what will happen at some point. Not a matter of when, not a matter of like if. It's a matter of when it will happen." And every beat of that film has kind of come true in this weird, I don't know, weird time, really, isn't it? Like,
Yeah. I mean, Contagion. It's crazy how like all that stuff about touching your face, that was in the movie ended up playing into all of our lives, ended up being our everyday reality.
well, yeah, that's that. But obviously, yeah, I'm talking about the chapter "The Day Antibiotics Don't Work Anymore," which obviously,
Oh, right.
this is like that's kind of how it's so prescient to what's going on right now in regards to yourself. But like, that's just one of many like topics you cover in this book. Just kind of
Yeah, I
want
mean,
to, yeah, you go ahead, man.
I'm glad you highlighted that chapter, because it's like what interested me when I started writing about the day that antibiotics don't work anymore was the idea that, you know, they're not going to be able to do, if your diabetic grandmother needs to have her leg removed or something like that, then she's not going to be able to get that surgery anymore after antibiotics because when antibiotics aren't usable anymore, just because they would normally, a procedure like that, they would normally pump you full of antibiotics to guarantee that you'll live through that amputation. And just the idea that like a lot of what I guess you would call everyday infections,
Yeah.
normal infections, would become would go back to being, you get a splinter, you can die again. We're used to the idea that if you're slicing an avocado and you cut your hand open and you need stitches or something like that, that injury is certainly not going to kill you. And when we lose antibiotics, we go back to a world where, no, you really need to worry about that injury. And that's what I was kind of focused on when I wrote that chapter. And just by kind of by happenstance, people wanted to talk. I went in with that in mind, and people wanted to talk to me about pandemics. And because bacteria, this is not a bacterial pandemic.
Yeah.
And yet, when you talk to epidemiology people, they're just like, well, plague is a bacterium, and it's also a contagious pathogen. And in our minds, I don't think we kind of like make the connections and the divisions between bacteria and viruses. Bacteria are these giant things that, like, they hang around, they reproduce on their own, they're super different as organisms, but when you're dying of one, you don't care whether you're dying of a virus or a bacterium. So when I was writing that chapter, I ended up writing about pandemic, just because, exactly like you said, the scientists were so eager to tell me how a pandemic was coming. So I didn't set out to predict this. I didn't chapter wasn't about predicting that this was going to happen. So when you read it, it's not like it'll go blow by blow through this pandemic that we're going through. It's just that, like, we really should have seen this coming, because I was a guy who wasn't trying to write about a pandemic, and I wrote about one anyway. And it was out there. We should not be surprised that this happened at all.
Well, it goes beats for beats with like a lot of the stuff like you kind of see like we should be worried about. Like you mentioned, like presenteeism, like that kind of idea that without sick leave, we are just kind of putting ourselves out to this. And like to go back to the thing of contagion, whilst researching for that film, the writer said like that is one of the things they were told is without sick leave, like people will like just spread things so fast, and that's kind of what we're seeing, I guess. Like for me as like a British person, we've kind of got presenteeism mixed with this stiff upper lip of like keep calm and carry on. So like we're doubly fucked, I guess, in a way.
Well, I mean, in the U.S., it's like we have presenteeism just because we have no social safety net.
Yeah.
And you've got the dole, such as it is, and we've got like nothing.
Yeah.
We've got you're fucked.
Yeah.
And then in Japan and South Korea, they've got presenteeism just because I lived in South Korea for a year, and it's just that, like, you work 16-hour days just because you don't want to rock the boat.
Yeah.
They want you in there all the time, and and so and in South Korea, you show up if you're sick. When you're doing your presenteeism, you do it in a surgical mask, at least.
Yeah.
And now we're learning that helps. What's funny is being in South Korea, when I was, none of the foreigners would wear a mask. It felt so weird. It was like, what do I think? I'm just gonna walk around the street wearing a mask? What am I, a surgeon? It looks weird. I just don't do it. And boy, has that ever changed,
Well, like, I don't want to focus this whole, because I guess everyone like listening's probably just got pandemic being shoved down their throats at the moment. But there's as I said, this is one of many like chapters in this book. One being, one I've read the title and I was like, that's some. Obviously, it's the first chapter, so it helped. But it's something I really wanted to read, was the day the UK finally abolishes its monarchy.
Yeah.
Which is something I personally call for a lot of the time, because I kind of
yeah. Are you a Republican?
Well, I just kind of see like it as a redundant prospect, in the way that like you bring up the point in your book about like the people who should be fearful of the lack of monarchy in this country are people working in tourism,
Right.
which I found a really interesting point. But like a counterpoint to that, just like, obviously not to, you've done the research, but I look at France, and like they still have the castles, and like they have all the stuff that the monarchy used to own. People still go there. Legitimately, we won't lose Windsor Castle if we get rid of the monarchy. Like, if anything, it'll probably bring more people in, because we can turn them into like heritage sites, or like people can actually look inside, as opposed to going, oh, the Queen lives in there.
Yep, exactly. I mean, the classic example is Tiananmen Square, and all of the, like, everything in Beijing used to be all the emperor's stuff, and now like that's still what everybody wants to see, because now it's Mao's stuff, and like but the counterpoint to that was that there I was in the in Windsor because
Yeah.
I wanted to see the crowds around the Queen because I needed to talk to them, and they were all there. They had just spent money on train tickets to go to Windsor to see the Queen on Easter, and then I met up a mother and her daughter who had flown in from Florida because
Wow.
they knew that they couldn't afford to see the upcoming royal wedding at the time, the one between Meghan and Harry. They were like, "Oh, we're just hoping that we'll see him on Easter." And they didn't. They didn't show up to church that day. But they got to see. The other one. They got to see. They got to see the.
They got to see one of them.
They got to see. Somebody royal was there.
Yeah, perfect.
And they were spending the money. But is that is the fact that like people show up from Florida and fly into Luton Airport and stay in an Airbnb, is that worth a system of government? Is it worth that being the basis of your system of government? Basically,
well, it's not though. The royal family in this country don't actually govern anything really. They're just kind of there. Obviously, we have politicians so we have political parties that run the country, but I'm obviously not coming as somebody who knows what's going, knows all about it. I'm no expert in any way, but it's more of a thing that in times like now, especially in a time of crisis, they wheel out the Queen to kind of let the people know you're gonna be all right, even if that may not be the case. She's kind of just like a state figure to tell us on Christmas Day and in the times of panic, you're gonna be all right. And it's a very bizarre construct, I guess.
Right, but if you look at the system, the way that Graham Smith of Republic wants you to look at it, then he says this, and I'm actually kind of persuaded by it. That guy, by the way, Graham Smith of Republic, God love him, he's not very charismatic. He just goes on to your talk shows, eaten alive by much more charismatic and better spoken TV hosts and stuff like that. They're just like, here's a guy who hates the Queen, and then they have him on, and then they tell him off, and then there he goes, and then nobody has to think about it at all. He makes the argument that, and it's probably one that is not news to anybody who's listening to this, but it's just you look at Prince Charles's history of investments, and his biases clearly inform the actions that he will prefer Parliament take when he's king down the line. And so people know what people, he bestows titles upon people, and people want those titles. And so how what behavior will sort of win you these forms of approbation and acclaim. And that is a form of power, and that is a valuable type of kind of power that affect the way that the government is run. So it's not that the royals have no power; they have rubber stamp power. But it comes down, and this is what I talk about in the book. This is do they have no power? Because here's a question: if Parliament takes action to remove to become a republic, and then they have an act of Parliament that's done, it's signed, it's approved, they have to then take that for assent to whoever the monarch is. Do they then rubber stamp it? Because if they rubber stamp it, they're done. Do they actually make that move? Do they end the K in UK for all time?
Yeah, we had a very weird moment at the start of the year this year where our current Prime Minister lied to the Queen about the fun thing that we had to distract us from everything before this pandemic, which was Brexit.
Yeah, Brexit was a nice distraction for a while. Yeah.
I don't know if we're going to pick up with that once all this has blown over, but there was a whole thing that obviously Boris Johnson had lied to the Queen about like, oh, these are my plans, when like they weren't at all. So yeah, you are right in that. Yeah, there is. I'm probably speaking on things that I probably don't know that much about, which is almost like case. But that's why I speak to people like you who have done the research and
Yeah,
looked
well,
into these things.
I felt a bit bad weighing in because I'm
Yeah,
American, therefore I have this sort of like inherent bias. They teach us from like, when we're in first grade, they teach us that the King of England was a real bastard and we kicked his ass and now we have a country. And um, so like, so I went into it sort of with that in mind. Like I have to be as open-minded as I possibly can to the idea that maybe having a monarch in charge of everything is great. And the best thing I could say about a monarch is you have somebody who's raised to be good at like shaking hands and being nice to foreign dignitaries,
yep,
and that person is the head of state of your country, who all dignitaries, that's who they're going to meet, and our person is whatever dickhead we feel like electing that year. And it can be somebody who really really sucks at shaking hands and being nice to, not shaking hands anymore, but being nice to foreign dignitaries and stuff like that, like we have right now.
yes, yeah.
So
Very interesting time to be talking, I guess, about this
yeah.
kind of stuff. Yeah, I guess I'm not sure when this would go out, but this is within the week of. I guess will be at some point it will be branded as Bleachgate in the near to distant future, I guess.
Yeah. But I will
Which
say this about Donald Trump. He and believe me, I am not a Donald Trump voter. But
yeah,
like, you watch the news and you see pundits on CNN and MSNBC kind of poo-pooing every possible potential harebrained cure and
yeah,
crazy elixir that's going to cure coronavirus. And like, my faith is in science and modern
yeah.
medicine, but I desperately want it to turn out that eating toothpaste cures coronavirus, so that this can all be done.
Oh,
Like when like as a good coastal media elite person, I am supposed to look at all of those people who are injecting themselves with bleach with such disdain. But it's like, no, I get it.
yeah.
I want this to be over. Yeah.
I've got friends of mine who saw an article headline that just read like France is doing studies to see if nicotine like is
Yeah. Right.
fights against coronavirus, and they're like all of a sudden it's like this 20-day habit's going up to 40 because it's like if this is
Yeah.
gonna kill it, let's get going. Like
I know. Oh God. I mean, I quit smoking. If I could go back to smoking and say like, no, it's good now, like that
yeah.
would be the best. I would love that.
So yeah, with like I guess how would you like I hate to do this, but how would you kind of like sum up like the elevator pitch for your book, basically, for people at home who kind of wanna maybe take, oh, we've dived in a little bit on two of the chapters, but how would you
It's
like
it's a it's a collection of hypothetical future scenarios that really could happen, and I sort of describe them in terms. I describe them in the terms that I personally think are most plausible or interesting, and then I work backwards to sort of explain why I've given you that scenario. So it's a mix of fiction and fact. Each one starts usually with like a little kind of short story or something like
yeah,
that, and then I sort of use um, research, a lot of time spent at the library, a lot of interviewing people, a lot of travel around the world. I went to the UK, I went to India, I went all over the place trying to find the answers to like what these things would be like. And so that includes the day we talked about the one about the UK, we talked about the one about antibiotics not working anymore. There's one about the last fish in the ocean dying. There's one about the US banning all guns. And so these are not all things that I think will happen, but I sort of presuppose that they will for each chapter. And
yeah.
then I work backwards from that assumption, sort of explaining what that day would feel like. What would be good? What would be bad? What would it feel like? What would it smell like? What would you experience? So, you can say that you feel emotionally prepared for all of these things, because God knows, no matter how many people went out there and saw Contagion, nobody was actually prepared
Yeah.
for this that we're going through right now. But maybe you were a little bit more emotionally. Maybe you were glad you saw it because you got a little preview, and that's what I hope I can offer with my book.
Well, like you mentioned at the beginning of your book that part of the reason for kind of tackling this, maybe I got it wrong, but like part of the reason for tackling these subjects and kind of is from a place of like anxiety, almost like an anxiety and fear, and like fighting, like coming head on with your own like fears of the world. Like, do you think has it helped you? Has it helped you writing this book to kind of tackle like those fears?
My this is what I've been doing for years now, is sort
Yeah.
of like taking these topics and figuring out what would happen. And it is because at the beginning, I mean, it was because I'm a person with an anxiety disorder. I
Yeah.
get panic attacks, I get nightmares, and researching my phobias. And I'm a person. I'm one of those. I'm one of those knowledge is power people. Other
Yeah.
people aren't. I've had people read it and say like, I had to drop it. I had to put it down. It was too scary, which is cool to hear as an author. Like, you love to hear that somebody was like so scared of your book that they had to put it down or something
Yeah,
like
I
that.
guess it's the same as like directors finding like, my film was so shocking, like people
Yeah,
walked out of the
yeah.
cinema. Like, yeah.
It makes you feel cool, but it's like, but I've also had people, a lot of people have read it and said like, oh, soft stuff didn't scare me at all. Oh, I'd heard it all before, which is bullshit, because there's like stuff in my book that's not in any other journalistic source. But your mileage may vary on how scary stuff actually is. It
Well,
goes, it covers things that would be nice, like the abolition of all slavery for all time, and it goes into like the heat death of the universe in the epilogue. So it covers the gamut of scary topics. And if you come away kind of scared or anxious, my wife got scared and anxious by it, then that's one acceptable reaction to it. And apparently another acceptable reaction to it is to be like the 14-year-old big brother at the state fair going like, "Man, it wasn't scary at all."
yeah. Well, like when you agreed to do this interview, I kind of like was like, right, I know. It was like I need to like dive head on into this book and kind of like at least like I listen to audiobooks, so at least listen to some of it or get my head around it, and then kind of listen to the forward, and was like, oh, like, because I'm prone to like catastrophizing a lot of the time. Like I'm also like, yeah, I'm there on a spectrum of like anxiety, and like, but I've passed like this should be the worst time to possibly, or like some could say, to read or listen to your book. But I personally found it like, and even the coronavirus itself, like I've never been so calm. Um, just because I guess my years of panic and worry and thinking about like what is the worst that can happen, in a way has kind of one of those. I don't know. It has happened. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, if that makes sense. I don't know. Like, kind of.
It does make sense. I mean, that's very nice. I'm curious, like, what part were you listening to when you felt especially like calm?
Just no, just in that, like,
Or this situation that we're all in is making you feel calm?
yeah, just like kind of, and I would normally ingest what I was reading, it like in regards to your book a lot of the time. Then I would take it away and then just like kind of let it wash over me and just panic me, and laying awake going, oh shit, yeah, the oceans, like I really need to get out there, like I really need to like throw in all the, like, getting rid of all the plastic in my house, being like, that's it, I'm going totally sustainable, I'm doing whatever I need to do to kind of, whereas like now, obviously I'm not buying more plastic. That's not the that would be the opposite to that. But like it was like, right, no, I can kind of like, I could deal with this. And I guess it's a two-part pronged effect of living in this time where it's like, well, everything is kind of a bit crazy, and I don't know. This has been a real knock on the door for me for my anxiety, and that like it's not like it. I don't know. This is probably something I should be speaking to my therapist about, not an interview
Well, no,
guest.
I
But
mean,
yeah,
I think I can address what you're talking about
yeah,
exactly. I mean, when it comes to reading like I don't know exactly what to call it, catastrophe journalism or stuff about how like stuff where the thesis of what you're reading
yeah,
is like everything is bad and all of it has to change and we're all bad. When you read those kinds of pieces of journalism, um, they either say they sort of say like when you read about climate change and
yeah.
there's not one specific chapter on climate change in the book. It's just sort of a theme that sort of like runs throughout the entire book, which that was one thing that I had in mind when I wrote it, because climate change is not a day when it finally happens, because that already
Yeah,
happened
yeah,
a
it's always
year.
happening.
When it comes to reading about that issue, there's this tendency that journalists have to sort of say at the end of whatever the piece is, just talked about how like 99% of all species go extinct, in a week, and it's all your fault, you person reading this, um, and yeah, they're right. um, but like then at the end they say like, oh, and we need to move toward more sustainable energy sources or whatever it is,
Yeah,
buy more reusable plastics or something like that. And you read it and you're just like, well, that's obviously bullshit. If I switch to all renewable energy, if I put solar panels on my home, it's not going to stop this problem. Like that's clearly not the answer. The answer is something where we have to do things that are so disruptive to the status quo that like you're gonna see it
yeah,
when you walk out in the street. You're gonna see that the change is happening. Greta Thunberg, said one of the things she said was that like when she learned in school how bad climate change was, then she was shocked to find out that
yeah,
this was how bad it was, because she was like, why don't I see out in the streets? Why don't I see it changing? What it's this is all going on as normal. They're driving cars.
yeah.
What are you doing? And like that was sort of what like sent her into a like almost like into a comatose state for a while before she became the activist that we all know today. Um, and so I say all that to say that like when we read all of these things and kind of become powerless, it's like I think something snapped in all of our brains when we were reading about this pandemic in January. We were just like, oh, whew. Well, like Adam Curtis, the documentarian Adam Curtis, he has that oh dear thing, that like when you read something, then as you're a passive consumer of
Yeah,
journalism, you read it and say oh dear, and then move on with your life, and that's your role in this, is just to consume journalism and move on. It's not like you're supposed to like change the
yeah,
systems that are
yeah,
in here. And that's not what happened with this one. We didn't get to all just read about the pandemic that was going, like, oh, things are bad in China. Oh dear. And then all of a sudden things are bad where you are.
yeah,
And you
yeah,
can't just say, oh dear, you got to not leave. Um, and so this was an example of something where like, you know, it it arrived. It showed up. It rang your doorbell. It it said hello to you. You didn't. There was no cognitive dissonance between reading about it in the newspapers and looking out in the street. You can look out in the street and see this pandemic.
yeah,
It's out there, and so it's like, okay, so back to climate change. Like you'd I can't tell you what the exact connection is, how these two issues dovetail. What are we going to see? Like nobody driving? Like how does that work exactly? And I couldn't answer the question. But what I will say is that like when we're actually doing something about it, when we're doing the equivalent of
yeah,
social distancing for climate change, it'll be like this, because you will look out the window and see that it's happening. So you will no longer have that feeling that nothing is happening, that nothing is being done. So I mean, I think like having a world event happen and then having it ring your doorbell sort of is teaching us that we're we actually are in the same world as the news
Yes.
and it can actually show up at your house, and that I think is the therapy for us all. Like maybe we're all kind of more emotionally ready to deal with things, like the things in my book, when when the time finally comes. That was a long monologue,
No.
and I'm done.
No. So, what was the genesis of the book? Like, when did you first get the idea how did you come upon these being the things that, like you say, climate change is something that runs throughout the book, which like you do get, like you talk about like the degree, how much the degrees of the earth, and just a lot of the issues, kind of whether it's the oil, like the when will the last barrel of oil be used, or the thing of like fishing and stuff, like all of these things will affect just our kind of mass farming of fish, like obviously do affect climate change and stuff like that. But yeah, how did you come about these were the definite things, like I guess some people, like some of the titles are a bit more light-hearted, like the day we get a real Jurassic Park, like, but like yeah,
Yeah.
where's the
Well, I mean,
genesis?
it was all of the things that I kind of think about all the time. It's like I have a personality where think I don't like to just sort of I don't like to do the Adam Curtis thing and just go, oh dear. Like
Yeah.
I like to go like when somebody says like, and then there'll be a pandemic. So think about that. Then I'll say like, okay, but like, and then there's a pandemic. So then what happens?
Yeah, yes.
And then what happens? And then what happens? And then what happens? And then what happens? That's my personality. Heat death of the universe, that sounds real bad. Like, so what if we're there and the heat death is happening? So like what do we get? Like
Yeah.
what happens to my body when the heat death is like like that's how I treat these things. Know the I want to know the ending of the movie. Whatever people are describing, I want
Yeah.
to, like, it's gonna be really bad. How bad? Tell me the whole thing. So it was just that instinct to just know the whole thing, to not just leave it at the ellipses, like it's gonna be bad. Just so give that some thought, just like to take it a step further. So let's just like all of these issues that like the Jurassic Park one that's a good example because like um you know when that movie came out, or when that movie and book came out when I was in third grade, um, it was all very much like there were it was such a big blockbuster movie that there was like a TV special per day, like the real Jurassic Park. When will that happen? And they were all really dumb. Well, they weren't all really dumb. It's just that like they didn't. The people doing that research didn't do even the amount of research that Michael Crichton did to write the fictional book, and so they didn't really like give it any thought. It would be as unthought out as somebody just kind of going like, well, actually dinosaurs are extinct, they're all dead. So like
Yeah.
like it's just sort of like the sort of like actually things are not like they are in fiction. This is not, we're in the world which is nonfiction. Things aren't like fiction here, so no. And I've just never been sort of like satisfied with
Yeah.
with that kind of like dismissive, like let's be grown-ups thing that I think that things like that usually are, like debunker articles or things like that, which does sort of like sometimes drive me toward like conspiracy websites and the show Ancient Aliens and stuff like that, but like I still have a reality filter, like, don't worry. I go there. I think I like to think I can sift out what's meaningful and useful when I'm in those kinds of places. So I kind of wanted to write something that was not so sort of like dismissive and, oh, let's be adult about all of these topics that that interest me, that I think other sort of like books and articles and things like that were handling in a way that I found like dismissive and boring and dumb.
When did you start? Like you said, you've always written articles about this kind of topic and the things that make you scared. Where was it? Like, where were you? Like before, obviously the book. Like, what publication were you writing the?
Okay, yeah, for Vice. Yeah, I was
Yeah.
working at Vice, and like I wasn't always able to write things like this. I mean, I didn't know I could. I had a column. I started out writing just about like the world around me in LA, and like I wrote this my first article that I ever wrote freelance for Vice when they first started taking when they first rolled out vice.com as a publication online with its own editorial staff. They opened an LA office around that same time, and they hired editors. And I was just like, oh, I like that magazine. If they're going to have editorial on their website, I want to write for them. I worked in advertising. I was nobody. I was like, I didn't even major in journalism. I majored in screenwriting. I was just like, that sounds fun, and I want to do it, and it would be better than the job I have. And so I immediately wrote an article about one about LA, just about some like ridiculous municipal projects that were going on where they were like selling LA kind of landmark buildings, and I found it really funny. And then the second article that I wrote was this really sort of like sarcastic article about Earth Day, and about how like Earth Day is it's Earth Day, and then I wrote about a bunch of the horrible, like total despair-inducing things that were happening in the world at the like around Earth Day. Like, yay! So that was not a very mature. Neither of those were very mature articles. These things are depressing, and that kind of makes me laugh in a dark way. And like, you know, and I slowly found my way into like that kind of thing, that kind of like, this is a bummer and that's funny thing was a path that I kind of followed until I eventually had a full-time job there. And then I would say questions in story meetings like, you know, what is it like what's the day like when Kim Jong Un like sends a nuclear missile over to LA, and like what happens then, you know? And that was and they were just like, yeah, I don't know, can you write about that? And I was like, I don't know, maybe. And then I tried it and it worked, and I became the guy who does that, whatever that is. And then I did a million of those kinds of articles.
Well, yeah,
And
which kind of brings me to, it sounds like this could have been one of your like pitches. What happens when we interview Nicolas Cage just with Nicolas Cage quotes, which like is like in it
eventually this had to be a Nicolas Cage
yeah,
related.
of course, but like what I like to do with this podcast is just speak to people from so many different walks of life and just find out about like what they do. And then just at some point in their life, there's been this intersection with Nicolas Cage, whether it be, like tomorrow I'll be speaking to a software designer who has a I'm not even sure how it works. That's why I'm speaking to him. But he has a thing where he can use the kind of GPS in your phone, and he showed me a 5-minute presentation where he had you log onto a website, and if you move your phone, it uses like the axis and the GPS, and it moves a picture of Nicolas Cage on screen. So it's those kind of I want to meet. I want to meet those kind of people. I guess. I, d- I
how
guess
he
just
touches the lives of
exactly,
many
yeah,
and
and
multifarious people in so many walks of life.
and yeah, like again, I don't know when when this will go out, but like I have plans to talk to a historian and tour guide from New Orleans to kind of find out what makes it such a crazy and appealing place for Nicolas Cage. And this guy
Have you
written
been to New Orleans? Have you been to
no, unfortunately
cemetery? I think it's Cemetery 4 where his pyramid
yeah.
is.
So I found this guy just from being like, first of all, I was like, I want to speak to the person who built that mausoleum, and then I was like, I couldn't find a name, and then this guy was quoted in an article. Rob Florence is his name, was quoted in an article that said all about the conspiracy theories around why it's a pyramid. Is it Nicolas Cage is a part of the Illuminati? Is it just a nod to the National Treasure films?
Exactly.
So yeah, obviously this would eventually come would come round to Nicolas Cage. So how did that article come about? Was it just one of these kind of, I don't know, like as you said, like blue sky thinking, just how about we do this?
It's one of those ideas so dumb that at Vice you have to do it. Like, you know, you get all kinds of PR emails from all sorts of people when you work at a publication like that, and you just ignore most of them because you just can't use it. It's just like, hi, I'm from, I'm from NBC, and our new show has a brand tie-in with Colgate, and we would like you to write about it. And we're just like, no, there's nothing for us to say. And you just have to ignore most of them, and they know you're going to ignore most of them, and it's just like they all want to have these relationships with the media because that's free advertising. And so, he was one of the people who, the PR email, like when it hit my inbox, I was just like, I want to do this. Like I don't have any idea how I can get our publication to run an interview with Nicolas Cage about his movie Dog Eat Dog, but I still want to do it. And so, because I have to pitch, these more sort of like expansive things that are harder work than just like, I want to just talk on the phone to Nicolas Cage and have that be my job for the day. And so, I included it in a long list of pitches. Like, I want to talk on the phone to Nicolas Cage. Somebody wants me to talk on the phone to Nicolas Cage, and I want to do it. And my editor, mixed in with all these things about, North Korea and stuff. And my editor at the time, Jamie Tate, who is brilliant, was just like, yeah, you want to talk on the phone to Nicolas Cage. Like, how do you justify that? And I was like, maybe I prank him somehow. Maybe or maybe I do something stupid or something like that. And there was just like a back and forth for a while. Just like, okay, I could, because at Vice, the way that we, like, we're all idiots, and we know what kind of garbage we would click, because it's just like this, I've got to know, like, what did this person do? And because we know what we would click, I think most of us there, this was in, like, I don't know what year this was, like
2016. Yeah
2016. So at the time, it was kind of a different place. At the time, there was a lot more sort of poop stuff there at the time. And like we all read a lot of BuzzFeed listicles, and we were all sort of, none of us have a very good maturity level, and so we know what kind of stupid stuff would get our attention, and that's the stuff that we write. And so there was just this back and forth for a while, like what headline would get our attention, and it was actually his idea, but in the following way, just like, well, there's no way that you could like interview him using only Nicolas Cage quotes. And I was like, no, I could do that. Just like it was him he threw it out there dismissively, and me just wanting to interview Nicolas Cage and have that, and I wanted a lazy day at work. I was just like, yes, if that will work, I will make that happen. And so,
because
it ended up being what?
In essence, it could be quite an easy thing, because the guy has close to 100 films as somebody who's working his way through all of them. Like, so you probably could, like, if you wanted to play it safe, you probably could have played it. It's probably plenty of times in movies that he said, hello, how are you? Or like,
right.
He's actually just asked people about their day, or like asked any questions. But that's the thing about
clickbait, though, right? Because like if you clicked it and the questions were just hello, how are you, then you'd be like,
no, you want someone taking a bit more of a dare, and obviously
right.
You say it like,
So then it ended up being kind of hard work, because you're exactly right. So then I start going through his entire, like, filmography, looking for like famous quotes that he put in movies that were in the form of a question. you know. So like so this thing that was supposed to be easy ends up being really hard,
Yeah.
because then I have to I have to watch the movie Dog Eat Dog, which did you see it yet?
I had that. No, I'm watching them in chronological order.
Okay, so you'll
that
get
is
to it
what
kind of late. Okay.
that is what I'm looking forward to in a way, just because it's the holy trinity of Nicolas Cage, Willem Dafoe, and is it Paul Schaefer directing? So
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
gonna be. I know
I
it's
mean,
gonna
and
be.
it's like, I mean, did you see First Reformed recently?
No, it's a one on my list. All this time
Yeah.
inside, I know I should be watching it because I like Ethan Hawke and I like A24, but that means nothing.
Yeah, well, I mean, so Paul Schrader has been like, I don't know, it's he's got a good streak going, and
Yeah.
Dog Eat Dog is this sleeper that nobody saw. That to me was like, I was really glad I signed up to like interview him about this particular movie, because it's like such a Nicolas Cage movie.
Yeah. Well,
So it's a really, really insane movie, and it doesn't look that insane just from the trailer, but he makes it insane. They both make things that don't seem crazy. I mean, that's both that Schrader and Nicolas Cage both. I'm glad that that
well,
I'm glad that those two streams came together, because like it was a delightful experience.
this film, like Dog Eat Dog, is actually a response to Dying of the Light. Was directed by Paul Schrader, and studios kind of got in the way and compromised the film against Paul Schrader's like vision for it. So Dog Eat Dog was them going, fuck the studio system. We just want to make a like balls to the wall, all out grotesque film. Like, do you know what I mean? We don't want to hold back, and we just want to go crazy with it. We want Cage up to 11.
I did not know that story, and that makes perfect sense, because that really is what it is, And so, and so because of that, I kind of, I was like, oh, I am gonna get away with this, because like, so I have this one question on here that is so he says in Ghostwriter, how does it feel to have all of that evil inside of you, all of that power? All I had to do was, because his character in the movie is so insane, all I had to do was say, Dog Eat Dog, how does it feel to have all of that evil inside of you, all of that power? And he just answered the question. It ended up being like a fairly normal interview question. So I was kind of able to get away with it. It took me hours of going through like all of these Nicolas Cage, like all of the closed caption for like all of his movies that he'd ever done, just like Apple off question mark looking for his character asking a question, and then and exactly, I didn't as
yes.
whenever possible, I didn't just want it to be like, how are you?
Yeah.
There is the one where I said in The Rock, I guess we better get going, don't you? like that was kind of a throwaway to just to sort of kick things off. But yeah, so like that was sort of how I structured the interview.
So did at any point do you think he like cottoned on to what you were doing? Did he like?
I thought he would at the end. So he didn't. I'm pretty sure he didn't, and I was pretty sure he would at the end. And so I entertained the idea of finishing the interview with one of my favorite quotes, because I thought when I closed it off, I said, do you think fish have dreams? Which is something he said in Bad Lieutenant, Port of Call, New Orleans. And like, I just said it out of the blue, and I thought he'd be like, aha, all right, I remember saying that in Bad Lieutenant, Port of Call, New Orleans. He didn't. He gave me a speech about how he thinks that fish maybe do have dreams. He had a whole like story that he wanted to tell me when I asked him that question, and I was just flabbergasted listening to him tell this story about fish that I had just prompted. So like, I thought it was over, and like I thought the interview was over, and I had it like I had it in my head to transition from him going like, yeah, that was a pretty crazy movie quote, which was the answer that I thought he was going to give me. Like, I see what you've been doing. Like, I thought the gig would be up by then. And it wasn't. Instead, he answered the question straight. So then I couldn't transition into the question I wanted to ask, which was going to be from The Rock, which is my favorite Nicolas Cage movie quote that ends with a question mark, which is, "How in the name of Zeus's butthole did you get out of the cell?" And I didn't get to ask him that because like it just would have been so weird out of the blue since he had answered the previous question so normally. Like on my deathbed, I will regret that I did not say to Nicolas Cage, "How in the name of Zeus's butthole did you get out of the cell?" But you know, that was just sort of how it shook out.
I feel like of all actors, though, he's the perfect person to have done that to. Not just that obviously there's such a wealth of material to go through, but just in that, like you say, like looking at it now, the the kind of monologue he went on about fish having dreams is just like the almost the thing of legend that we hear of Nicolas Cage, that he is this kind of nouveau shamanic, like,
yeah, he's amazing. He's
so
amazing. I loved him so much in that moment when he was saying that fish thing. I was just like, you truly you are the national treasure, Nicolas Cage. Yeah.
Well, I'll be sure to put the article in the show notes, as well as like links to your book and where people can buy it and listen to it however they want to ingest what you've written.
Yeah, please. I mean, people have responded very well to the audiobook. So if you want to get the audiobook, I recommend it. It's read by me, so it's this voice you're hearing right now.
Yeah, that's one of the things. I've recently got like back into listening to audiobooks, and like I hadn't even thought about it with your book, and I'm normally like put off when it's not the author themselves. And like, as somebody who's listened to it who isn't the author, I can say it is a really good listen, and I imagine it would be a fantastic read. And I found it really handy as well. There's a PDF that comes with the audiobook that kind of like with great illustrations for each like chapter heading and kind of graphs in there and stuff like that. Yeah,
and a board game. Yeah.
Amazing. Well, I'll let you go, Mike. I'll let you get on with what you've got to do. But before you go, is there any way people can like keep up to date with like your articles and stuff like that? And like,
yeah, sure. Check me out on Twitter.com. I'm at Mike Lee Pearl. You can find me there. And this was really fun. I really appreciated being here. I had a great time.
The pleasure is all mine, Mike. This has been another bizarre conversation in the best way possible. How was that for you guys? Because I had so much fun recording it. It was a really good chat. Yeah, I just really hope you guys took away from it what I kind of took away from it, that Mike is just a great mind, and he's got so many interesting things to say about so many interesting things. Unlike me, because I just said that sentence, so many interesting things about so many interesting things, but it's true. So I'll let it slide. But anything, as I said in the episode, anything that Mike mentions, whether it's his book or the article he wrote for Vice, the fantastic interview, which I remember seeing in 2016, and it always stuck with me. And when I first started this podcast, I reached out to Mike, but kind of at that time didn't really have the confidence or just the drive to follow up all these ideas that I had. And I'm so glad that however many years later, like 4 years later, that we managed to connect and talk about that amazing interview, because otherwise I would never have heard of his initial plans. And I'm kind of glad I got to speak to him when I did, because I wouldn't have got to talk about how great his book is and share that with you guys. So yeah, if you do get a hold of the book or get turned on to any of that, please hit me up. Like I'd love to discuss some of the things that I talked about in it with some of you guys. So as of next Wednesday, we will be back to normal with just regular broadcasting. This time it will be talking about Season of the Witch. So tune in for that one, just for a conversation between me and my good friend Joe Gardner of Tonight With podcast. We'll be talking about that. And as always, you can keep up to date with what's going on with all things Caged In on social media. So that's at Caged In on Facebook and Twitter. And cagedinpod@gmail.com for the emails, or you can support the podcast on Patreon for as little or as much as you want. It doesn't matter. It's just all I really want is money to cover the hosting fees for the podcast. Apart from that, like, I don't know, any extra money I get would be great. Like, I'd love to be able to print some t-shirts or just any cool things we can do like that. Just anything I can do really to give back to you guys. So yeah, as always, Petros, Caged In podcast. You've been rad. I've been caged in. Bye.